Hey there, this is Tom with the Diogenes Lamp podcast. I appreciate you listening in, and most importantly, I hope you enjoy what you hear. Before we start with today's episode, I'm going to ask you for a small favor. Believe it or not, history podcasts, especially in their early stages, tend not to be cash cows. Shocker, I know. I too was blindsided by this news. Now, I didn't go into this for the money, I think that much is obvious. But unfortunately, books, research materials, and equipment aren't free. Please, go to patreon.com/Diogenes Lamp Podcast, and for less than the price of a coffee once a month, you can become a member and get access to bonus episodes, recommended reading lists and documentaries, shout-outs, and anything else we'll offer in the future as this project grows. If you are especially broke, hey, I get it, but please, make sure to give us a 5-star review when you listen to us on Spotify or Apple Podcasts, and subscribe to the pod on your preferred podcast listening medium. Your support is appreciated, and more importantly, it is needed in order to keep this operation going. On that note, I hope you have a great day, and now back to the show. The SOE commented on Zervas' disregard of even elementary organization and noted that, quote, he hopes for the best but employs a crowd of useless officers because it would disturb the peace to fire them. As an organizer, his value is nil, end quote. Likened by one British agent to a, quote, bland and easygoing company director. Zervas relied for his support in the hills of the pre-war village committees, whose members were often friends or relatives of prominent officers under his command. Houtas, Konstantinidis, and Zervas himself all depended upon their extensive family connections in northwest Greece. Major Bathgate, the SOE operative assigned to Zervas in 1943, likened him to the, end quote, chairman of a provincial tramway company, which is boosted and kept going, but always has hanging over it the shadow of radical changes to buses in the dim future. In the meantime, the chairman isn't doing too badly for himself, and if the future isn't too rosy, he himself is well provided for. And that was a quote by Mark Mazower's Inside Hitler's Greece. It was an excerpt from the book. Welcome back, everyone, to the Diogenes Lamp podcast, the Greek Civil War segment we're running here. Episode 29, the SOE, Organizing Guerillas, and Gorgopotamos, Part 2. Again, just want to give a huge shout out to my listeners and my Patreons, especially perhaps to my Patreons, but to the listeners as well, of course. You guys really do keep me going here. We have a lot of listeners from around the world, and I am every day, let's just put it, I'm quite flabbergasted that anyone wants to hear about the Greek Civil War. It's a pretty niche topic. That's why I picked it. And it's very underreported, I felt like. So I thought it was about time that someone kind of fills people in on what's going on. So I'm really happy that you guys are listening to it. I want to give a shout out, especially to the Patreons, Rong Ta Wu, Elephantarchis. Thank you so much for your contribution. Mega Yorgos, Zoarchos. Thank you so much. Darth Mater, Taxiarchos. thank you guys. Your money does help this project immensely. It helps us keep going. Your money goes directly to bills that I need to pay to keep this project going. So without your money, this project would probably get shut down a lot sooner. But through your donations, it's going to keep going. I'm at least going to get us through this Greek Civil War segment. And now that I see that there is listeners and you guys are enjoying what I'm putting out there, I'm going to keep putting it out for you. So thank you so much, guys. Where we left off last, the group led by Myers and his second in command, Woodhouse, had successfully landed, survived in the mountains of central Greece, and made contact with guerrilla bands, most notably Edes and Zervas and Elas and Aris. And it's at this point that we have before us what could be called a motley crew of sorts, right? We have Venizelos and Republicans in Edes, communists and others, really, in Elas, and the British SOE kind of stuck in the middle, more so focused on blowing up this bridge and juggling the complex situation of organizing competing groups and ideologies. After all, Venizelos and communists have a history, but as the saying goes, politics makes strange bedfellows, right? So, the attack on the bridge was planned for 11 p.m. on November 25th, 1942. A night planned specifically due to it having a full moon, which provides for natural light from above, which helps with just about everything before the time of night vision goggles became readily available to infantry. By this point in our story, the SOE team of 12 had been reunited with each other and had gotten a handle of all their special equipment needed to do stuff like blow up a giant bridge. Most notably, though, plastic explosives. Yes, very, very important, of course. The entire party, SOE and Greek guerrillas, moved from their cave by Stromi to some cottages in the village of Marvolithari, a village that Zervas and his band had already been established at. So let's talk a tiny bit more about the final and most important stage or objective of Operation Harley. Blow up this bridge. So the bridge itself, the Gorgopotamos Bridge, or viaduct, if you will, it's often referred to as a viaduct, was about 7 miles or so south of the city of Lamia, and it carried the north-south railway line across a deep, deep gorge with a river at the bottom of the gorge. The bridge was 674 feet long and was supported by 4 stone and 2 steel piers. The steel supports were the target, which the idea was, as determined by the engineer, if they were destroyed, it would cause the whole bridge to collapse. The attacking force that would get the job done was divided into 6 groups in total, 4 SOE groups and 2 Ahndartes groups under Zervas and Aris. Something important to point out, by the way, about Aris, he has decided to take part in this operation, even though the big party heads in Athens told him he was not approved to do so. So Aris doing his own thing and being in charge of what's going on in the mountains, butting up against the Communist Party heads in Athens, it's going to be a reoccurring theme that we're going to see again and again, right? The primary reason, though, for Aris making this decision, and it's a really logical one when you hear about it, is simply put, why would he want to allow Zervas to take all the credit, right? At this, which again makes total sense. On the flip side, his competition, Zervas, didn't need a magnifying glass to see the obvious value in having a strategic relationship with the British, who, after all, were a global superpower at this time. So yeah, Aris didn't want to be left out, and Zervas wanted a powerful ally in the British. Back to the operation. 2 of the 6 teams were to attack the Italian guards that were stationed at the north and the south sides of the bridge. Meanwhile, another 2 teams were to blow up the rail line on the north and south side of the bridge, in addition to cutting telephone wires. We've discussed in this segment before what a big deal it was back then to have telephone wires and how important those were for obvious reasons. These actions were meant to delay or stop altogether the arrival of reinforcements once shit started to go down, right? Another group, led by Tom Barnes, was to blow up the bridge, and lastly, there was a command post by Myers, Woodhouse, Zervas, and Aris, along with a reserve force to be deployed in the event of any trouble. So there's the plan, right? Easy enough, you could say. Of course, though, contrary to what we might see in the movies or on Netflix, very, very few plans survive the moment of contact with the enemy. In other words, as the famous philosopher and intellectual Mike Tyson said once upon a time, everyone's got a plan until they get punched in the mouth, right? So, yeah, the operation started at 11 o'clock that evening, right on schedule. Shooting began, and for a good 20 minutes ish, the shooting continued, and it soon became clear that the Italians were gaining the upper hand. Part of the reserve was sent in to help, but didn't really produce any significant results. Another 20 minutes or so of shooting continued, and the situation looked so bleak that Zervas wanted to call for a retreat, but he was stopped by for restart. The operation started at 11 o'clock that evening, right on schedule. Shooting began, and for a good 20 minutes or so, the shooting went on. It became clear that the Italians were gaining the upper hand. Part of the reserve were sent in to help, but they didn't help much. Another 20 minutes or so of shooting continued, and the situation looked so bleak that Zervas wanted to call for a retreat, but he was stopped from doing so by Woodhouse. All of this was going on the north end of the bridge. On the south end of the bridge, things were going a bit better. The situation there was led by Zervas' second in command, Michalakis, who, after an hour of duking it out with the Italians, fired up a white flare, signaling that their position had been taken. Even though there was still an active firefight between Ahndartes and Italian forces on the north side, Myers told Tom Barnes to go in and get the demolition done. After all, the goal is to blow the bridge up, not to get into a protracted clash with the Italian army. So Barnes goes in, and another small hiccup arises. You see, Barnes was under the impression that the steel supports were L-shaped, and thus he had molded the plastic explosives accordingly. But when he got to the supports and saw firsthand that the shape was in fact not L, but instead U-shaped, this obviously made things difficult, especially given that the bridge is over a giant gorge with a roaring river full of rocks below and with an active firefight going on the other side of the bridge. Barnes had to act fast to remold the explosives, and after about 20 minutes, Barnes blew his whistle, his, hey, bridge is going to explode whistle, let's call it, right? Which alerted everyone to take cover. Myers recorded firsthand, and quote, "There was a tremendous explosion, and I saw one of the 70-foot steel spans lift into the air and, oh, what a joy, drop into the gorge below, in a rending crash of breaking and bending steelwork," end quote. Shortly after the explosion, the north end of the bridge was finally secured, but there was still another steel pier that had to be blown to bits. Barnes was hard at work, but quickly realized that this job would take more time than anticipated. And he told Myers, expect another 40 minutes or so, give or take. At which moment, Myers realized that Italian reinforcements from Lamia had arrived by rail, as close as the rail would take him at that point. Luckily, though, Barnes was able to get the job done about a half hour later, and a second giant explosion destroyed the already wrecked bridge, and Woodhouse fired a green flare to signal the retreat. The group split up and made their way back up to the refuge of the mountains, where Barbanico had hot meals waiting for them all. All in all, the SOE and the guerrillas made it out, for the most part, A-OK. Only 4 out of the over 100 guerrillas that took part in the operation were injured, with 0 fatalities. But 16 Greek hostages from neighboring villages were executed at the bridge in retaliation. Tom Barnes and 2 other Brits were awarded the Military Cross for gallantry, as was Michalakis, whose group secured the south side of the bridge. Myers and Woodhouse were awarded the DSO, or the Distinguished Service Order, which is an even more fancy, high-ranking UK military award for officers. And Aris and Zervas were awarded the OBE, the Order of the British Empire, which is also very prestigious and is awarded to military personnel and civilians alike for distinguished service and yada yada, all that kind of stuff, right? Lastly, let's not forget about good old Barbanico, right? He was awarded the MBE, or the Most Excellent Order of the British Empire, which is like the other awards, but more so for recognizing contribution to one's local community and that kind of thing. Operation Harling and the destruction of the Gorgopotamos Bridge was a success. And to this day, Operation Harling, it's a bit of a legend in the stories of resistance in Axis-occupied Europe. The operation itself was supposed to coincide with the British counteroffensive in Egypt, thus delaying access supplies to Africa and supporting the British in that theater. But by the time the bridge was blown, the Battle of El Alamein had taken place, and the Desert Fox Rommel was in full retreat. Yeah. I mean, to throw insult to injury, if that's the right phrase, when British General Montgomery had been asked if the blowing up of the bridge helped support his battle in Africa at all, he apparently said he had never even heard of it. Nonetheless, it did make some impact, with German records showing that it did in fact disrupt flows to Africa and also out of Greece to the rest of Nazi-occupied Europe. So given that the material impact of the blowing up of the bridge was negligible, you may be inquiring, what was the point of it all? Why blow up a bridge that ended up not even supporting anything in reality, not even accomplishing anything? What was the benefit of it, right? Well, in a place like Axis-occupied Greece, the mere act of doing something like this shows that resistance is in fact possible, which is very important for a downtrodden, starving nation. In some, it was the psychological impact of this operation that was the real success, or the marketability, let's say, of the Ahndartes and the guerrilla movement. Also, it gave the British an idea of what could be accomplished with the united resistance movement. After all, in this operation, Hellas and Edes cooperated with each other. Probably one of the bigger things that the destruction of the bridge marked was the lawlessness of the mountains. After Operation Harling, Italian soldiers dramatically cut back on attempts at intercepting Edes or Hellas bands. Woodhouse would note, quote, "Mountain Greece was already in effect liberated." So what now? Per the original plan, when the bridge was blown and the operations objectives were met, the bridge was blown and the operations objectives were met, right? Operations a success, mission complete, yada, yada, right? That was the whole point of the Harling mission. But before Meyer's team was to be evacuated, a new order came out of SOE Cairo office, which commanded the Harling mission, that being the crew that was sent to Greece to conduct the Harling operation, to stay in Greece and become, drumroll please, the British Military Mission, or the BMM for short. The purpose of the BMM was to organize and coordinate the actions of the Greek guerrilla resistance movement, and to control the spigot of British guns, ammo, supplies, and most importantly, money that the Brits are ready to give to the guerrillas, given, of course, that the guerrillas got on board with what the agenda of His Majesty's government was. A couple of our main characters going forward, Colonel Eddie Myers and Woodhouse, received additional orders. Myers, that he would stay in the mountains and report on the situation from there. And Woodhouse, that he would have the honor of being a liaison between the BMM, the British military mission that is, and the resistance groups, where his job posting would be in Athens. Woodhouse accepted the position while also understanding that staying in Athens for any prolonged period of time was borderline suicidal. And I say that for a couple of reasons. For one, Woodhouse was 6'5" and a redhead. Greek redheads exist. 6'5" Greeks exist. But Greeks that are both 6'5" and redheads are rare. So there's that, right? You don't want to stick out like a sore thumb in Nazi-occupied Athens. Equally, perhaps more so, really, the bigger deal, and this applies not just to Woodhouse, but to anyone staying in Athens at this time. Athens was known for being full of spies, full of collaborators, double agents, triple agents, and every shady character in between. It's where many of the party heads of the resistance groups were stationed, like Edes and Eam and the KKE. And remember, it was also under German command. Keep in mind, it was the Italians that held the countryside for the most part, and the Germans 3/4 of Crete and some other islands, and Athens was jointly occupied between the Nazis and the Italians. But of course, the Germans were the real masters. And while I don't want to entertain the myth of the harmless Italian occupiers, I think, and if there's any historians or listeners with a good argument to counter this, please let me know. I think it's not a stretch to say that, generally speaking, the Nazis were a bit more sadistic and brutal than the Italians. And on that note, I think that's a good place to end it today. Join us next time as we continue to see the SOE do its thing while the resistance gets more organized, more brave, and more bold. Take care, everyone. Bye-bye.